successful nutritional therapist and has got a really interesting case study to share. So if we start with the toxic elements, essentially everybody is exposed to toxic elements all of the time. They are found in virtually everybody to some degree. And we are designed to come into contact with them all the time. We are designed to come into contact with them and then to remove them. That it's a biological process that's well established. And as we come into contact with them, the body ingests them, it starts to move the system. In doing so, they are incorporated into the hair shaft. And so by testing the hair, we can get a picture of what is actually happening. Sam, the feedback is because you're in presenter mode. If you switch yours to listen only, the feedback might stop. Not sure. We might have to play with the buttons for a while. It's the first time Sam and I have done one together. Anyway. Yeah, that's done it. That's fixed it. Fantastic. Okay, so why would we test the hair? We come into contact with toxic elements all the time. If we absorb them and we have a current exposure, it will show up in the blood. So if you're in contact with, say, mercury, and you are ingesting it on a daily basis, highly unlikely, but if you were, you would test the blood and you would see the mercury perhaps. But in 30 days' time after the exposure, it will no longer be present in the blood, but it will be in the hair. Also, if one has very, very low element exposure, so perhaps one is stripping, say, lead paint, then the exposure to the lead is very low and it may never ever show up in the blood, despite the fact that the body is absorbing it, and it will therefore show up in the hair 30 days after the exposure. Now, the quirk is, if it shows up in the hair, what it means is that the body has been moving the toxic element around the system. It doesn't mean there's a current exposure. It means there has been an exposure in the past. But the problem is we don't know how far in the past. And so that's where careful note-taking, careful case history taking comes into play. We may never actually identify the source. You might take notes of the client, you may find the clue. It may be very, very easy. For example, you might see a high mercury level, the person may have mercury fillings. You can therefore make a reasonable assumption that the mercury has come from the fillings. But sometimes you may never ever find the source. I have had clients with very high things like uranium, and we will talk a little bit about that element later, and we just don't find the source. If we can't identify the source, we just carry on and hopefully we can start to eliminate it. Although principally Mineral Check does hair mineral testing, I just wanted to mention a heavy metal urine challenge, because I know this is something that some people have come across. Done correctly, with the urine challenge involves pre-challenge and post-challenge. So that what means you take the urine, that will be tested, you then use a challenging agent, and you then test afterwards. You need to use a specific chelating agent. And one of the interesting things I find about the urine testing is that the chelating agent is very specific for the heavy metal. So it's quite possible to use one for mercury, but that won't pull out the lead. The other thing that can actually affect the results of a urine challenge is the diet. If you have eaten a lot of fish and you test using something like Maracapol for mercury, it is possible to get a positive result for mercury, but that is because of the fish rather than specifically because of the body load. So urine heavy metal challenge is interesting. You need the specific agent. You do need to do 2 tests. It can be expensive, but it is perhaps something worth doing. And as Sam will talk about later, I know it's one of the things that she actually did with the case study she's going to present. Principally, as a practitioner, I would use a hair mineral test, and I use Mineral Check, obviously, because I work there. And here we have a little chart showing the toxic elements that we're testing for. And you can see there is a white band at the bottom, a lighter pink band, and a darker pink band. So the white is our reference range. The pink, light pink, is getting on for high, and the dark pink is high. And I want to talk a little bit about the reference range and how that's calculated. Just because something is in the reference range does not mean that it is acceptable. Any laboratory produces its reference range based on what it finds. That means that it will plot the results of a normal, healthy population into a bell curve. And this little slide demonstrates a bell curve. And everything that falls in, if you like, the green area of that bell curve would be considered to be the average. And then the curve to the left is going to be the low, the curve to the right, where it's becoming high. So normal is a value shared by around 90% of a healthy population. We have a big reference range for mercury because we find a lot of mercury. It doesn't mean that just because it's in the reference range, it is okay. What it means is you've got an average amount of mercury. And so looking at the figures is quite specific. That'll give you a clue about what is going on. And I've come across the term hidden toxicity quite a lot. So that might be when an element is in the low area, and somebody, a practitioner, may say that they believe that hidden toxicity exists. So the term is used to describe the possibility of the presence of heavy metals, even though they are not shown as elevated on the test. The term hidden toxicity is often used about copper. And somebody may claim that there is hidden toxicity of copper based on symptoms, even though it is not shown on a laboratory test. So I get asked a lot about this one, and I would say that the comment of the hidden toxicity and developing a protocol around that is a very poor protocol. So that's my slightly confrontational point. I think it's a poor protocol because you don't know if it exists. If you have a whole bunch of symptoms, then you do the test. If you work with the findings of the test and what that test shows, then you are working on an evidence base. You may find later that there is a toxic element being detoxified, being released from storage. It may show up on a retest. But really, my comment a lot when I'm talking to practitioners in the office is work with the findings you have. Do not think about hidden toxicities. Work with what you have. You've got a laboratory test. You were thinking that you might find high mercury based on the symptoms. You didn't. You found high copper. Work with that one rather than the concept of a hidden toxicity. And I just want to mention copper very specifically here because the hidden toxicity phrase appears a lot around the idea of copper. Copper is both essential and has the potential for toxicity. And so it is a vital nutrient, but if we have too much of it, it becomes toxic. One of the interesting things is that it is often stored in association with mercury. So you might find a very high copper level when you're expecting to find mercury. You might find a high mercury level when you're expecting to find copper. So we'll work with what we actually find. Copper imbalance, so a high copper, and I know we're going to talk specifically about the toxic elements, but I would say that an elevated copper becomes a toxic element. And so this copper imbalance is a very, very common pattern on a hair analysis. And what it means is that it's biounavailable copper. The copper is present, but the body cannot access it. In order to access it and to use it appropriately, the copper has to be bound to a blood protein, ceruloplasmin. And also to excrete copper, it must be bound to the protein ceruloplasmin. Copper is moved around on this protein that is made in the liver, but it needs the adrenals to send the signal to the liver to make the blood protein. When the adrenals are overwhelmed, they may not send sufficient signal to the liver to make the ceruloplasmin. And that's just because the adrenals, are focusing on their priorities. So if we do not have enough adrenal function, or a good functioning adrenals is perhaps a better explanation, then the adrenals don't send a signal to the liver to make the blood protein ceruloplasmin. So an overloaded liver may occur when there's high estrogen. Estrogen and copper are closely linked. Estrogen and copper are detoxified in the same pathway in the liver. And so that's a very simple explanation, would be like two rows of traffic going into one. And what we get is a backlog of both estrogen and copper. And they will be, one of the two of them will be reabsorbed. Usually the copper, which gives us a high level of copper being reabsorbed. So we're adding to the copper imbalance. The high copper suppresses thyroid function and it suppresses adrenal function. And so the copper continues to be reabsorbed, not to be moved appropriately, and to be overloaded, which is how we get to the high copper situation. And I really wanted to cover that because it is quite an important key. Because once the liver becomes overloaded, it really will not remove the toxic elements efficiently. So as well as looking at the toxic elements, we always want to consider copper levels. And what we may find is that the copper is a significant part of detoxing the heavy metals as well. And the toxic elements I'm going to look at quite specifically are aluminium, uranium, beryllium, cadmium, antimony, arsenic, mercury, and lead. Some of them you will have come across and others not. They're ones that we routinely test for in the hair analysis. We also test for some of the nutritional elements like tin, which are essential but are also toxic in a high element, so like copper. But I'm going to focus today, because we're limited on time, to really the main toxic ones. And the one that everybody thinks about when they think about a toxic element is mercury. And sources, many. You will automatically be thinking about fillings and fish. Now, there is a difference between the mercury in fillings and the mercury in fish. The fish mercury is an organic mercury. And what that means is that it has a carbon element in it. The body is designed to run on carbon, and so it readily will absorb the mercury from the fish. The mercury in your dental amalgams is inorganic. That means there's no carbon compound. That means it's harder for your body to absorb. So you're more likely to absorb the mercury from fish than you are your fillings. That said, mercury is extremely toxic. It's way more toxic than arsenic. And so one really wouldn't chew on arsenic all day. And so we have this issue with your fillings anyway. I don't automatically recommend detoxing fillings or removal of fillings. There is a protocol associated with that, and it can be an expensive procedure. It is possible to do detoxification of mercury without removing the fillings. In a sense, it is perhaps a little bit like emptying the bath with the tap still running, but it is possible to do so. And there's some fascinating work done in Finland on dentists using just vitamin E and selenium to detoxify mercury. They left, these dentists were being exposed to mercury in their day-to-day life. They had their mercury hair tested, their hair tested for mercury. They took vitamin E and selenium, and after 6 months, they were retested and they found a significant drop in the mercury levels, despite the fact they still had their occupational exposure. So I think you can detoxify mercury without removing the fillings, although removing the fillings is something certainly worth considering. There are also lots of other sources of mercury. Some of them are really not that obvious. People think of vaccinations, but it's even found in things like waterproof mascaras. That's the one that always makes women wince when I say it. Waterproof mascaras have mercury in them because it will stop anything else growing in them. It's the same reason mercury is used as a preservative in some vaccines. And I think with mercury, its symptoms are so many. I've often laughed and said, basically, if you gave me 10 minutes on PubMed, I could link any symptom you chose to mercury. And that is the issue with mercury. It is insidious. There are so many symptoms that are linked with it that when you find it, it is worth setting about either detoxifying the mercury completely or certainly using a selenium vitamin E as an antioxidant that will start to prevent the mercury doing any further damage at a cellular level. So I'm not going to spend a lot longer on mercury. I could probably fill an hour chatting about mercury alone. I just want to have a look through some of the others that we come across. A less well-known toxic element is antimony. This one has a very low toxicity, less than 1 milligram percent, so very, very low. It's one of the toxic elements that might show up, but it might not be as significant as the mercury. Antimony has no known function in a living organism, and it's often found in things like fire retardants, and it's a fixative in plastics and dyes, and therefore it's one that shows up a lot in children who will chew on things because the fire retardants and their toys, plastics, dyes, they use it as both the colouring and to harden the plastic off. So it will show up a lot in children, and it has been implicated in things like hyperactivity. It's quite easy to detox, actually. It's one of the quickest ones. It detoxes very quickly through the liver using magnesium and vitamin E and selenium as its antagonists. And then a better known one is lead. Lead is a widespread contaminant. Around about 1922, I think it was found that engines ran much better if lead was added to the petrol. What that meant was we have a worldwide contamination of lead. Lead is no longer found in petrol, but it is still commonly used in things like the surprising places. The yellow lines painted along the side of a road have a paint that is 10% lead. That might sound innocuous because it's just on the road, but it breaks down with the traffic going over it and it creates a lead dust. Often see high lead in dogs, for example, that walk alongside busy roads, and it will be coming from that dust in the main. It has other really surprising sources. Candle wicks are often dipped in it to help them burn more slowly. Water pipes, something that a lot of people think about. Lead is often found in water pipes. So a really good, simple solution to that is just to use a Brita filter. The really inexpensive jug filters that you can buy, they'll remove up to 87% of the lead in drinking water. It has quite a lot of toxic effects, and its primary storage site are the bones. So you can have a very early lead exposure to someone, perhaps a child being exposed to lead paint, or a young person renovating a house being exposed to lead paint when they stripped it off and renovated. And then the lead is stored in the bones. It may not then show up for another 20 to 30 years, but as the bones are remodeling, that lead can be released into the system, and that's when it might create a health impact. Much less common, again, is uranium. One that we test for in the laboratory. It has a low toxicity rate, and there is not a great deal of clinical significance to uranium when found in the hair unless it is at exceptionally high levels. But one of the things that's quite interesting, and we'll come on to why the low levels might be significant in a moment, is that some blood types, AB and B, have a great affinity for uranium and they will store it. And animal studies will show that animals will retain the uranium when their iron levels are low. So iron status is very, very significant for absorbing uranium and also for absorbing the next element I'm going to talk about, which is aluminium. Aluminium uses a transport protein called transferrin. I sometimes picture the transferrin as like a little flying saucer because it's a round shaped transport mechanism. It's a protein and it has to transport something in the center of it, and that is aluminium. Iron. If there is not enough iron present, the body will transport the next chemically similar thing, which is aluminium. So we have a transport mechanism for iron. If the iron is low, the body will transport the aluminium. The body then, and forgive me, this is a little bit anthropomorphic, but it should make sense. The body will recognize the iron transport protein. It gives it free access to anywhere, and therefore the body absorbs the aluminium. Because the mechanism, which should say aluminium, no, actually says, oh, transport protein, transferrin, I recognize that, come in. And so the body will absorb the aluminium easily, and once absorbed, it becomes harder and harder to detoxify it. So the body will then put the aluminium into storage. As to where aluminium is found, it's found in things like deodorants, it's found in cookware, it's used in some baking powders, it's used to help things like salt and some seasonings flow freely, aluminium containers, aluminium foil. Again, it's found in our drinking water in very, very low traces. It should be filtered out of the drinking water. It's used in part of the cleaning process, but again, little traces may remain. So using a Brita filter can be very, very helpful there. It doesn't have a known function, and it's detoxified quite easily using magnesium. This is where you need to be quite specific, and you need glycine and magnesium together, and the aluminium will start to fall. And I will talk a little bit more about detoxification in a moment. And then a lesser known element is arsenic. This is how hair testing first came about. Victorian police force were looking for a method of finding out about arsenic poisoning, and they discovered that they could trace it in the hair. So a very, very old system. The Victorian police in London began to use hair testing to look for arsenic toxicity in order to prove arsenic poisoning. Today, we would find arsenic in seafood, in pesticides, in treated timber. Sometimes shows up in children's tests when they've been playing on railway sleepers in a garden that has a lot of preserved timbers, shown up in architects that are doing things with roof timbers, because those timbers are all soaked in arsenic solution to stop them due to rotting away. But also it'll show up in very low levels, perhaps in things like seafood as well. Cadmium is the one that people think about with their cigarette smoke. It's also found in tooth fillings, it's found in spray paints. It actually also is found in a lot of our food sources like wheat, rice, some seafoods, because it leaches into the water supply from industry. And so here we get a little toxic element representation of the elements I've been talking about and I've really whizzed through them quite quickly, because the hair test, if you do one for a client, will give you a lot more information about where you can find the elements. So I really want to talk a bit more about how we actually start to remove them before we come on to a specific case study. So my general advice would be rebalancing the adrenals and the nutritional minerals and supporting the liver. Identifying the source. Saunas are useful, using Epsom salt baths. They can be very, very helpful. Using protective minerals. So looking at where somebody is low. And when I was talking about the elements, I talked about how selenium and magnesium could be helpful in detoxification. So I would look at the nutritional levels of those elements found on a hair test and identify whether or not I needed to supplement them. And as a general rule, if there's a toxic element shown, then most people will need both the magnesium and selenium and vitamin E and B6. Also, I pay very careful attention to the diet. The supplements are all very well, but the diet becomes really key as well. Having good quality protein is essential, because you want the body to break down the cells, release the toxins, and then rebuild the cells. And the sulfur amino acids are absolutely key. In nature, the toxic elements are bound to sulfur. And so we need to put in sulfur for the elements to bind to them for excretion. And when we're detoxifying, I always talk about working from the back end up. Never detoxify a constipated person, because otherwise you will start to release the elements, which will sit in the bowels and just be reabsorbed. So constipation, tackle that first. You absolutely need to be having a bowel movement of at least one a day. We also need to think about supporting bile production, about adequate antioxidants, about liver function, promoting fat loss. And one of the reasons that people may not lose weight initially is because the toxic elements are bound to the fat cells, and the body will not release the fat cell because it doesn't want to remove the toxic element until it has the necessary support to remove that toxic element and excrete it from the system. So just some things that we could think about might be glutathione levels, using glutathione, vitamin C, using milk thistle to support the liver, looking for the antagonists, making sure the diet's high in fiber. So we are thinking about bowel movements and making sure the system is able to clear itself out. Seaweed can be very, very helpful. Lipoic acid can help mobilize the toxic elements, and sulfur-rich foods. These will aid the mobilization and the transport of the toxic elements. So thinking about garlic, onions, and eggs are really key. Cysteine requires molybdenum, so molybdenum is absolutely key as well. Good sources of molybdenum will be the beans and the lentils, pulses. And always look at molybdenum, because if it's low on the hair test, you know that you're going to need to increase that in order to get the sulfur binding to the toxic elements. And adrenal support, absolutely key. Any toxic element is a stressor. And even if there is no other stress present, one wants to think about supporting the adrenals. And I just put a little slide here in about lecithin, because I know some practitioners will use that when they're thinking about fat digestion. And whilst it can be very helpful for that, when one's detoxifying a heavy metal, it can be both a help and a hindrance. Lecithin effectively stops the mobilization of the toxic element from storage. So if you're giving lecithin, you probably won't be able to detox someone. But if somebody starts to suffer from a lot of detox symptoms and feels unwell and you want to slow the process down, you can use lecithin to help you do that. Now, I talked a little bit about the nutritional elements and how I might choose them. And so alongside looking at the toxic elements, I would look here at the nutritional elements, and looking at this little snapshot here, you can see that magnesium is particularly low, as is selenium. I would definitely want to boost those. And I can see that molybdenum would also benefit from being boosted as well. So even if I was doing nothing with these other than focusing on detoxification, I would know that I'd need to use molybdenum, magnesium, selenium, and I would give vitamin E because the selenium will not work in isolation, and I would give B6 because the magnesium will need B6. And incidentally, just looking at that one, there's a great level of zinc showing. So I would be thinking also whether or not I need to give B6 as well to get that zinc properly utilised. I'm going to hand over to Sam, who is going to talk through a case study. And then after Sam's done that, we'll have time for some questions. And you can ask both me some of the technical stuff and Sam some of the technical stuff on the case study that she's worked with.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? So the case study is actually, it's the case study of my own sort of history, going back in time, starting as a 36-year-old, which is 12 years ago now. I had a lot of health issues at the time. Endometriosis was a big problem, but also lots of gut health issues, so classic IBS type symptoms, and then energy issues. So I was borderline classified as chronic fatigue. And then around the needed to sort of try and sort this out, I was also sort of developing quite a lot of food and quite worrying chemical sensitivities, which actually sort of accumulated in a sort of anaphylactic type reaction to aspirin and ibuprofen, which I didn't realise at the time, but that took quite a bit of investigation to work that out. So I was utilising those painkillers every single month, and also Constan, which is a pretty strong anti-inflammatory, which the doctor gave me for the endometriosis pain. So, so my health had been sort of declining at age 26, and I'll come back to that because that's sort of significant. At the time, I was living in Ireland. And I'd actually just started the nutritional therapy training because I was interested in trying to sort these issues out in a natural way. So at the time I did the York test, and I had a lot of IgG intolerances. So that was a challenge at the time because I didn't really know enough as a student. And I was reacting to almost things. So of course, now I know that that was probably an indication that my gut was very permeable or leaky. Dairy's always come up on any test I've done. And really going back through my timeline, I realised I've probably had an issue with dairy since I was an infant. And talking to my mum, she would have sort of confirmed that. And going to school in the 70s, we were given free milk, and I remember hating it and sort of trying to give it away to somebody in my class. So can I move this slide? Okay. Other sort of relevant things at the time then. So I was in a stable relationship and home life, but work was really stressful. So I was working in a client-oriented organisation, had lots of projects I was managing. I was managing a team of 30 people, and I was also then studying part-time. In terms of my personality, then very driven, type A, perfectionist type personality, thinking I could do it all. I was also exercising quite a lot as well. And then on top of that, I had a 3-hour commute. And then in terms of my diet, up to that point, so bearing in mind I was now studying and things were changing, up to that point I would say it was a very poor vegan type diet, which I'd been vegan since the age of 19. Appetite was also poor, again, sort of linked into the stress and my sort of daily work in life, really. So because I was studying, I decided to go and see a qualified nutritional therapist, and she did some tests. So we did an adrenal index test, and that came back showing I was in adrenal fatigue already. So flatlined cortisol and DHEA, which is imbalanced as well, which of course ties in with a lot of the symptoms. My poor immunity would have been linked into that. And then we also did a CDSA stool analysis at the same time, and that showed I had both Candida and the Blastocystis hominis parasite, which was, causing a lot of the so-called IBS symptoms. So I'm really not a fan of the term IBS. I've worked with many. I've been in for 9 years. I've worked with many clients who come to me saying they've got IBS, and that in my opinion, there's always a root cause. There's always something beneath that. Sometimes it may be food imbalances like gluten, but imbalances in gut bacteria, parasites, yeast are quite often the issue as well. So I always test when there's an IBS case. So quite a lot going on, which tied in with my symptoms. And then obviously did some work around that, but I also did a hair test. I think that's when I first came across Mineral Check. And I was really fascinated by these hair tests. And again, they are something I do utilize in my clinic. And again, I was keen to sort of share this story because I know a lot of them say they're not valid and maybe not that useful. Personally, I've used them with many of my clients. I think they're extremely useful, and they're a relatively cheap way as well of monitoring how that individual is sort of getting on, really. So my first hair test came back again. The sort of mineral status and balance, really, or imbalance, I should say, sort of reflected my poor adrenal function, and also then indicated poor thyroid function. Now, bearing in mind that I also had major issues with energy, that's significant. Again, the mineral status in general reflected poor gut function because I wasn't absorbing any nutrients, and my diet had been quite poor for at least 10 years. And then the other things that came up, which were a bit of a shock, were my copper. So Karen's already mentioned, which again is very relevant to this case. My copper was really high and my zinc was low. Now, copper is, as Karen mentioned, quite often it's linked to high estrogen. So again, I had endometriosis, but also high copper has been linked to anxiety. So it's an issue that has been relevant for me for a number of years, that I had highly anxious. And then high copper is also linked to high candida. So again, very much what I was seeing in the hair profile was sort of linking back into some of the other issues that I had. And then just to note that, and again, this became a bit of a red herring really at the time, I wasn't showing any, I was not releasing any toxic metals in. And again, knowing what I know now and with the experience, that makes sense because I was holding on to those toxic metals because my nutrition was so poor and I wasn't detoxing very well. So that's the first hair test, and you can see, so here's the copper, it's off the scale. And And then magnesium is pretty low, adrenal health indicated there. Sodium and potassium are imbalanced. Again, that's thyroid. The zinc looks okay on the test, but because my copper was so high, can indicate a relative imbalance and the inability to utilize zinc because copper blocks zinc. And then the minerals in general were pretty low. Iron is quite low as well. So that's where I was at the time. So you can see there's small amounts of toxic nutrients, but nothing majorly significant was showing in this test. So what did I do then initially? So based on the adrenal stress index test and the hair test, obviously doing quite a bit of adrenal support. So I did utilize the mineral check supplements to support adrenals initially. High zinc to balance the high copper, and then high magnesium and sodium potassium balance for the adrenals. Diet wise then, basically the balancing diet, definitely looking at protein. So this, again, as I became more knowledgeable about nutrition, I'm realizing that probably my protein intake had been way too low for a number of years because of being vegan, and I would say quite poor vegan at that. So really working on increasing my protein, and Karen's already sort of indicated how important that is for releasing toxicity and helping the cells break down and then rebuild. So, and then sulfur. So again, you know, like leek onions, cruciferous veg as well to really support the liver. And then something that I sort of decided I needed to do. So again, the other thing to mention is copper can be quite high. You get a lot of copper in the so-called veggie type foods, so beans, lentils, nuts, seeds. So because of that, I sort of decided to transition away from that vegan diet, increased eggs, and started to introduce fish. Now, I'm going to say that was actually, I'm still sort of struggling with that a little bit. I know what 8-9 years later, in terms of, you know, from a mindset, ethical point of view, I would prefer to be vegan. So it's something I do still struggle with, but nevertheless, I have adopted that. And I do think that's been really key. Protein into my diet has been really key. So what happened after that then? So this, around 2009, I would say, 2010, things were improving. I did feel slightly better. Adrenal health improved on the repeat adrenal stress index test I did. I actually chose to leave my job. So I'd qualified as a nutritional therapist by then. And that definitely helped. I wasn't commuting 3 hours a day anymore, and I actually was enjoying my work. So I really didn't like my previous job. In terms of so again, that wasn't a quick process because I had the parasite Blastocystis hominis and the Candida. And then as a result of that, there was a big imbalance in the beneficial bacteria. And that did take quite a while to rebalance. So I did what was then known as the 4-hour program. Obviously now it's known as the 5-hour program. I did try herbals for blasto. So I did ADP. That didn't actually work. So I did choose flagell, which is a really horrible, nasty anti-parasitic medication from the doctor on prescription, toxic to the liver, but you take it for 10 days. And it worked for me. It got rid of my parasite. Tons and tons of probiotics then and gut healing foods, etc. I won't go into that in too much detail. But for the Candida, I tried a number of agents for that, and what worked for me was a herb called Horopito. It is an indigenous herb to New Zealand. And supporting that, then my diet was pretty strict, and I would say I probably did that for at least 12 months. No alcohol at all. I had very poor tolerance to it anyway because of my poor liver function. Low caffeine, low to none sugar, I would say. Really, watched my sugar intake. And I would include, health food goods in that as well, things that are high in dates, gluten-free products that are high in sugar. I really watched what I was consuming. Um, and then gluten-free and dairy-free. I'm going to say mostly because it probably was the odd time where I accidentally consumed those foods. And I didn't actually eat any fruit for at least 12 months. Water filter then fitted into the house as well. That was kind of key. So coming into 2010, then I felt a lot better. My health had improved. Hormonal health was better, a little bit better, I would say, and my energy and stamina was better. But I was having lapses, so if I overdid it, I'd sort of crash. And I still had this issue with anxiety and very poor stress tolerance. So the CDSA at the time then showed that parasites had been eliminated. However, there were still traces of Candida. That was still an issue. But I was still having imbalanced cycles. And around my menstrual cycle, I would get quite a lot of IBS type issues like diarrhea, pain, etc., and erratic cycles. Copper was coming down on the test. And I did a little bit more research around that and sort of read about how, and Karen's mentioned this already, how copper and mercury can be interlinked. So anyway, I decided to go and do the urine challenge, which Karen has mentioned. So I did, so this is the hair test 2010. Copper was coming down, although it doesn't show it. It doesn't look dramatic on that test. But generally I was feeling a lot better. So I did the challenge with DMSA, which is dimethyl succinic acid, a chelating agent. And what you do is you do a urine test pre-challenge, which is your baseline, and post-chelation. And that showed basically that my mercury was off the scale. Lead also showed up in that. Did that. And I had a lot of fillings. I had 8 large mercury fillings. And I didn't have any fillings until about 26, 27. And that's when some of these symptoms started to happen. In terms of looking back on the timeline, that's when my endometriosis got quite bad and energy became an issue. So I did lots of research around pros and cons of benefits. Get these filling, a lot of information out there that says once you remove things, you can make things worse. Anyway, I decided I was going to get it done. But I had it done with a specialist dentist in Ireland, and it is this special dam process to ensure that you don't swallow any mercury. And that was in March and April 2010. In June, it was dramatic. I felt significantly better. So I do think that mercury for me was an issue. Now, it's not always a problem for everybody. And I'm not saying everybody should get their fillings removed, but like I said, I thought about it and decided something I should do. And all I can say is within 6 weeks, I felt amazingly better, and a lot of my issues sort of started to resolve. Now, something really included on the slides was that around the same time, I randomly decided to get my thyroid tested because of energy issues. This was before I had the fillings removed. And sort of by accident discovered that I also had very high thyroid antibodies. So my thyroid at the time was sort of borderline low, but within the doctor's range, they wouldn't have considered it hypothyroid. And of course, the doctors don't test the antibodies, but I did the test via Genova, and that was, I remember being really shocked. So my antibodies were at over 600 TPO antibodies, which is not good. So again, just to show that high mercury is linked to Hashimoto's and other autoimmune conditions as well. So that was a big concern for me at the time, because my mum has a chronic autoimmune condition. So, and I since doing my 23andMe, I also know that we have the genes for autoimmunity. Again, all of this now makes sense in terms of my overall timeline. So what did I do then to get that mercury down? So as well as having the fillings removed, I prepared for at least a month before the dental procedure. Started to use something called NDF, nanonized chlorella. Now that's, again, a natural chelating agent, and you have to build it up. So I started with 1 drop per day, building up to 26 drops daily over a 3-week period for 3 months in total. Continued with the gluten-free, dairy-free and adrenal support. I also added in green juices, so spirulina, barley grass, veggies, added some pea protein into that, so again to help with detoxification. And I really cut down on my workload at that time. So the filling removal was each time 2 fillings at a time, 3-hour process. I had a headache for at least 24 hours afterwards. It was quite exhausting. So really rested in between. Because NDF is a chelating agent, so remember, anytime you chelate, you're also going to chelate your nutrient minerals, so it does take out the toxic ones. So a good multi-mineral is really key there as well. And I took extra zinc, extra iron, but also supporting glutathione. I took selenium, and again linking that with mercury removal and extra vitamin C as well, which also supports the adrenal glands, and then magnesium, so Epsom salt baths and magnesium before bed for sleep. So I've mentioned that I did 3 months only. Again, strict diet, at least 12 months. Low caffeine. I don't really drink at all. No alcohol. Lots of green veg. And then I stopped the NDF. I decided to just go with just supporting my natural detoxification. Milk thistle for continued liver support, vitamin C. Again, continued with the zinc. So bear in mind what Karen said there about B6, balancing zinc, for utilization of zinc and magnesium. Of course, those 2 minerals are also really important for hormonal balance. So some of you might have read about the use of infrared sauna therapy for detoxification, and particularly around adrenal fatigue, chronic fatigue. So I did look into that. I decided not to do it personally because I wanted to do the sweat-free exercise. So that's what I chose to do. So in terms of progress then, so that was around 2010, 2011. In terms of testing, I have spent an absolute fortune on testing through that period. So again, it's been intermittent because of the high costs. My relationship ended around 2011, so that was a significant stressor for me. And since 2011, I've moved house 3 times and I've had numerous job changes. In general, I would say my health has been really good. Stamina far more consistent. I do use pacing. In terms of my hormone profile, then my endometriosis is completely resolved. I don't have any issues now. I would say I have normal cycles, normally around 29-30 days, no pain whatsoever, no heavy bleeding, no clots, and I'm now almost 48. And I think that's amazing to not be having any issues. My gut health also much, much better. I sort of waver from my gluten-free. I'm more actually dairy is a huge issue for me. So if I, inadvertently or choose to consume dairy foods, then I do have a problem. So generally I stick to the gluten-free, dairy-free. It's sort of a paleo diet, but I do have small amounts of grains and now and again some beans, lentils, but absolutely no alcohol. And I'm not vegetarian anymore, so I eat organic free range chicken and lots of fish. So in terms of tracking this with the hair test, then I just think this has been, I do think this is really interesting. It's been quite fascinating seeing the change. So you can see here 2013. So this was after I left Ireland and moved back to London. My copper had completely come down by now. Adrenal health, you see there, sodium, potassium levels much better, magnesium much better. But interestingly, I'm starting to secrete, or excrete, I should say, some toxic metals into the hair. And again, I believe this is because my liver function had improved, so now I'm starting to release those metals from the tissues. So something to note here, which was a bit of a strange one at the time, was my calcium level suddenly shot up. Now, to be honest, I'm not really sure why that is. Potentially, it could be due to hard moves. I've moved countries, moved to central London, but also high calcium shells are sometimes linked to protective mechanisms after some sort of traumatic event. So I'd been through a divorce. I'd moved house, I'd moved jobs. So I have a theory that it could have been the hard water, but it may have been that traumatic event as well. So that was a new sort of thing in my hair at the time, which is quite interesting. So 2014 then, so again, you can see still releasing mercury. The calcium's still high, but it's coming down. And generally, I would say, in terms of my levels of nutrient minerals, everything is looking much, much better on the graph. And again, you can see this is my test, which is about 12 months ago now. I normally track it every 12 months. Calcium's coming way back down. So again, I've moved again since then. So I moved in the end of 2015, I moved January 2016. So another move to Wales, changing house, and things are sort of changing. But again, you can see I'm still removing that mercury and arsenic is in my hair as well. So just things to note then, which I think is really relevant, is this has been a long process in terms of regaining my health. So this is a story of over 9 years. It's been slow, and I think partly that's to do with life. Life's got in the way. So if you look at my matrix timeline in a functional med perspective, life events have got in the way. So separation, 3 house moves, lots of changes in jobs. So I've had a lot of health issues as well. And then I got married as well in the last 2 years. So lots of things, lots of stress going on. And I really do think that's key. So Karen mentioned the link between the adrenals and liver health. I do think that was a big issue for me. So it's not a linear process. There was 3 steps back and 4 back, quite a lot of time points. Key things then for toxic metal removal, looking at the gut, absolute must, because of the link also between our gut and our liver. If your gut's not healthy, it's going to overload your liver anyway. And adrenal support. For me, this has been really amazing when I'm stressed, knowing when to step back, managing lifestyle factors. So putting ego aside, I've chosen to walk away from quite good opportunities because they just weren't serving me. Managing my emotional state has been really key. So yeah, I am one of those annoying people that now does meditation and yoga. And just to say, I think the hair testing is really useful. I've used it a lot, and I've never seen one test that's the same. It's very individualized, and I hope that this case study, in terms of the different profiles that you can see over that time period, has sort of given an indication of how that might work. So I'm going to hand back to Karen then. Are there any questions? So
that was brilliant, Sam. The thing that I thought was really, really interesting was and I actually put it when you were presenting, that there was a brilliant, good use of the timeline in linking your fillings back to your health issues. And so when I was talking about mercury, one of the things I said was I wouldn't automatically go down the route of removing fillings. And then you produced this wonderful case study where you linked your health issues and the fillings so closely that for you, that was such an obvious thing to do. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, I did consider it and read up all the research about, it can actually lead to toxicity because across the blood-brain barrier. When I really started to think back of, well, when did these issues start to happen? And I really do personally believe that it was, when I had those fillings initially, which is around age 26, 27, that's when my hormone imbalance issues really, became really problematic. So I didn't go into huge detail, but you're talking about, I was taking Nutrifen every month, having to take time off work. It was debilitating. So to have gone from that to now being, almost 48, where I'm perimenopausal, but I'm not having any significant symptoms. And talking to other women around my age where they are having significant issues, I just think that's quite remarkable, really.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to sort of throw it open now and see whether anybody else has any questions. And if you just type them in the chat box, either Sam or I will answer them. Okay, I can see a couple of people are typing, so that's cool. Okay, what happens if a client has dyed hair? I think, Rachel, that's a brilliant question. What happens if a client has dyed hair? I would still test the hair. The dyes that affect the hair and therefore may give you a false result are the ones that blacken the hair. So there are some African products, there are some Asian products, and there are some inexpensive, well-known products you can buy in the chemist that will blacken the hair. And they often do that by using lead. And so you may get what I would say is a false positive for lead if someone is blackening their hair. But they're probably using it in a hot, steamy environment. So they're opening the pores. So they're going to be ingesting some of that lead anyway. There is some research that suggests that some dyes that contain bleaches can affect the calcium levels. My own view is that I would still test. I have seen thousands of results over the last 9 years, and those that are affected by an external contaminant are extremely obvious. So I just go ahead and test. I don't think the dye makes much difference at all. Hopefully that's answered your question, Rachel. Sian, do you consider using zeolite as part? Okay, over to you, Sam. Did you consider using zeolite?
I did, Sian, and it's a good question. And this is always tricky because when we're looking at what should we do, there's numerous sort of things that you can consider. And I decided not to do that because I was using the hair to sort of monitor. I decided to go with the sort of rebalancing approach and using the sort of core factors and nutrients, as Karen sort of described earlier, to support and rebalance the mineral nutrients essentially. So that's why I decided not to do that. But I did look into it. Sorry, I forgot to add, this is kind of really key actually. So in terms of the autoimmune attack on my thyroid, yeah, again, that's really remarkable. So antibodies after, again, I think it was about a 12-month period after the mercury removal that I retested, that my antibodies went down from 600 to 60. Now, they're still around 60. I don't seem to be able to get them right down to under the detective limit, which is 30. But anytime I go, and I'm having that monitored with my GP as well, and anytime I go to the GP, my thyroid is considered within normal limits. So it's low, but it's within the range. And to be honest, I'm quite happy I've got those antibodies right down from 600 to 60. You know, I'm doing what I can there really in terms of that. So yeah, that was a very positive impact as well. So I'll ask Karen can ask. So short hair, I know Karen, you can use pubic hair. That's correct, isn't it?
You can. I will first of all say though that the sample is weight dependent. Okay, it's not length dependent. And head hair is way more preferable. The reason for that is that head hair grows continually, whereas pubic hair or chest hair or any other body hair grows to a specific length and stops growing and then drops out. So the reason head hair is preferable is because it's continuously growing. You get a picture of your nutritional minerals and it's a recent up-to-date pattern. If someone had no head hair at all, you can use other body hair. But do bear in mind that you won't know how old that sample is. So you can use it for looking for a toxic element and you can work on the results. But for things like using the testing then to follow up is perhaps not as effective. So the sample is weight dependent. So if someone has very short hair, what I'll often ask them to do is just let it grow a little bit and then send in a really, really short, lots and lots of really short hairs. And that seems to work because it's usually men who are shaving their head or cutting it with clippers. And that works really, really well. So hopefully that's answered that, Monique. Siobhan, what does CDSA stand for? Comprehensive Diagnostic Stool Analysis. So it's a stool test and it's used for looking for parasites and gut bacteria. NDF. I can't remember what NDF stands for. Can you, Sam?
Yeah, so NDF is the nanonized chlorella. I can't remember what exactly NDF
I know what it stands for. I think it's something like it's a commercial name for nanonized detoxification formula. I think that's
that's right. Nanonized detoxification factor, I think, or formula. Yeah, that's right. No, I've never had to take thyroid medication, thyroxine. So, and hopefully will never need to. So, yeah. Oh, I wanted to add there as well. So because of the antibody link, because of the autoimmunity that runs in my family, that's why I also stick to a gluten-free diet. So if you look at the research, there's a lot of research to indicate that gluten sensitivity may be a factor in all autoimmunity. So for me, I just think that's too much of a risk. So I just stick to my gluten-free diet. Although I would say, in terms of intolerances, I know that dairy is far more of an issue for me personally. So yeah, both, dairy-free, gluten-free diet essentially for the thyroid support. Yeah.
Okay, Kate has asked if someone comes back with no toxic elements, yet the case history suggests there might be, would you generally do a urine challenge? Okay, I don't know if Sam's answer will be the same as mine, Kate, but I would not use a urine challenge. What I would do is I would work on their nutritional profile. So if the analysis indicated a need for adrenal support, for digestive support, perhaps shows low levels of nutrients, it might show very low magnesium and so on. I would work on those findings, and then I might retest according to how much they do. So my interval between testing always depends on how much someone does. So if they go away, change their diet, change their lifestyle, take an extensive supplement program, then I might test it in 3 months. If they go away and make some dietary changes, take a few supplements, make a couple of lifestyle adjustments, I might test in 6 months. If they went away and took a multi and one other thing, it might be a year. So I'd vary when I retested according to what they did. And then at the retest, we might see a toxic element show. You see, I think it's quite interesting. If the case history suggests it's there, I still would bear in mind that we are designed to come into contact with these toxic elements all the time and to remove them. So if your case history suggests it's there, for me, the person may have just dealt with the insult. They may not have absorbed the toxin. So I would work with what I had on a test result, and I wouldn't necessarily go looking. I guess I vary that sometimes. I had a client once who was a animal behavioral therapist, and she basically said, every time I said something, she said, well, we'll test that. Oh, well, we can test that. Oh, we can test that. And I was baffled by her willingness to test. And when we talked about that, she said, well, basically, I work with animals. They can't say a thing, so I can't take a case history. So I just test everything I can. And so I thought that was quite interesting. So if someone wanted to do lots of tests, I might. But on the whole, I would work with results. Sam, would you generally do a urine challenge?
No, absolutely. I know I did it myself, but I don't recommend it with my clients, and I agree with everything Karen said. And also from what I've learned from my own experience is if you support the person, the individual, support their physiology, then the body will actually do what it needs to do. And I think my own sort of hair tests are showing that I'm now actually excreting the excess toxic metals. At a rate that sort of is supported by my lifestyle and my diet. So I think, as Karen said, if you actually try to rebalance with the supporting nutrient minerals, that sometimes there is a need to go in with this challenge. And like I said, I do think if you read about chelation, there are there can be concerns with chelation as well, and you can actually totally imbalance the system by doing even one chelation to do the challenge itself. So it is a risk, and I don't think it's absolutely necessary.
Okay. Right, I think that's possibly all the questions. I actually know a couple of you on the webinar, so it's lovely to see the people I already know. If you are a practitioner and you are interested in working with Mineral Check and you're not already, then you can register as a practitioner on our website, which is mineralcheck.com. With your detail, and it'd be lovely to work with some of you. Thank you very much, and thank you, Sam.
Thanks. Thank you.